Hi guys, my name is Olga Noel and I'm in Boulder and Dolls. Today we're doing something practical for all the lazy artists just like me. And the topic today is how to copy the body part that you've already sculpted. Think of it as a giant duplicate button that you can press, but it will cost you. Important note here, copying doesn't involve mirroring. It just gives you the second copy of the same body part that you have created. If you're starting out with a left leg, you will end up with two left legs. The only way to mirror a body part is to sculpt it with your hands mirrored. Also, one very important rule I want you to stick to if you continue watching this video. I'm talking about your own sculpt that you are copying, not somebody else's. I know that I can't enforce it. I know it's dangerous talking about it on the internet because yes, people steal, and no, we're not teaching thieves here. So freeloaders, please close this tab and go learn something else. For example, how to sculpt yourself. I do not support recasts and I never will because this is stealing, so I'll wait for everyone who thought of copying somebody else's work just now to close this window and go somewhere else, and I'll wait. Okay, now that it's just us, artist to artist, I really hope that you succeed in everything you do. And my process will help you to succeed a little bit faster. Let me help you work a little bit smarter and reduce the anxiety of you ruining your original. Who will benefit from this technique? Firstly, it's beginners. This technique will help you to analyze your sculpt without ruining it, without risking it, and looking at it anew. And secondly, it's for experienced artists. You guys can experiment when something feels off, but you don't know what it really is, and you want a safe fallback. Let's go. So you want to copy a body part that you yourself have sculpted. For me, it was the lower torso part of my boy doll this time. But I also use this process for feet, hands, things I need fast copies of when I want to mess around with materials and ground rolls. From here, you can go two routes, the lazy one and the proper one. The first one is polymer clay mold shells, and the second is plaster press-on molds. Do not use air dry clay, porcelain, and cold porcelain, nothing in the form of slip or any other material that comes to mind that has a shrinkage rate. Please use 0 or near 0 shrinkage materials, or else you'll suffer more than you'll gain and everything is going to feel off. Also, let me introduce you to our lazy meter and here how we will keep track. Every shortcut I mention adds points to the lazy meter. Every proper time-consuming step detracts points. But it's very important to remember that lazy artists don't work less, we work more, but a little bit later. So let's go for method number 1, the lazy polymer clay route. For this demo, we're taking the lower torso part of a boy doll, as I mentioned before. The body part that you've sculpted is our base, and we'll work with it a lot, so make sure it can withstand it. I recently shared with my patrons, join us here by the way, that I bought 4 packs of Serbian polymer clay. It was very soft, it had like a big pack with typical doll colors on it, but it turned out trash and I needed to get rid of it. But we're not contributing to landfills that easy, so here goes a more smart way to get rid of it, step by step. First one, rub the detail. Use 1 layer of cling film or a very thin single layer of foil. And if you're using foil as I did here, create the thinnest layer that hugs your sculpt, and this way we will be able to retain every single crevice, every single sculpture choice that you made. Next step is make the mold shell. Take your polymer clay. Trash clay works fine, but the better way is to actually use quality polymer clay as with everything, but I had trash clay, so we're using that. Divide your mass in 2 and wrap each half around the sculpt. Try pressing firmly so that the details are transferred on the inside of this 2 lumps, but try not crashing your original. Also very important is not to fuse these 2 halves into 1 lump, or if you already did that, try cutting with a blade on the middle line. This way it will be easier to then separate them. Next step is to bake the shells together with your original. Fully bake it until it's solid, and make sure that when you take it out of the oven, you get a fully cold polymer clay. Wait till it's no longer hot to the touch. Then carefully crack them apart. It might take effort, and you might need to cut some parts as I do here, but the main part for you is to free the sculpt. In the end, you must be able to crack it in 2 parts and get this beautiful 2-part mold where you then can push fresh polymer clay. Not air dry clay, mind you. You do not need this shrinkage rate to ruin the proportions of your copy detail. And now comes the last step and the most fun step. Let's copy the part. Prepare your good polymer clay, cut some cling film, 2 parts will be enough. Use a polymer clay rolling pin, affiliate link for it in the description as always, and then make a polymer clay pancake. It should be fairly thick, but not like 1 centimeter. Around 5 millimeters is fine. Now put the polymer clay pancake on the cling film, then put them in the shell and press it in. First, use your fingers, try making sure that every single crevice is filled. Add some polymer clay to the parts where you feel that the sculpt is getting too thin, and then take some foil, scrunch it and pack it in. This way you will 100% hit all the crevices that are in your sculpt. You will retain as many sculpted details as possible, and there won't be surprises down the line. Next step is optional. I don't do it, but you can. You can connect those 2 shells into 1 sculpt and bake them all together, or as I do, you can bake them separately, then cut the seams and connect them later. Note that the thicker your shell is, the less likely the shell itself would crack and ruin your sculpt, meaning that thicker molds are sturdier, but mine were thin, so lazy points. But I also only needed 1 copy, so I wasn't too concerned with that. And as a result of this process, you will get 2 body parts. My torso versions were 1 angel body, and this option I needed preserved as it was sculpted, and I created the second one for a resculpted or more refined male anatomy. After baking, please clean up seams and refine the sculpt. As you can see, my molds were trash, but they gave me structure, and even if I have spent some time on sharpening the details, it still was worth it, and it was more efficient than sculpting a completely new body part from scratch in order to change this one detail about the body. Now method number 2, the proper plaster route and steady press-on molds. This is the clean professional way of handling this situation. So our lazy meter goes to 0 and it barely moves throughout this process. I use this method to sculpt my resin doll faster. At that point, the scale for me was very important, and I also wanted to retain as much control over the material as possible. So I took my porcelain doll and I made a lot of press-on molds. Not every single part, because a lot of them were resculpted and I needed some different solutions for resin, but some of the parts I really loved about my porcelain dolls, and I was eager to copy them and paste them basically to my resin dolls. This way is much more time consuming, but at the same time you are working less later and you are not sort of dragging the copy to its original form, but you are basically opening the mold and you get the copy practically 1-to-1. Let's compare. Here my seams were practically 1 centimeter at times, but I was able to restore it, although it took me 1 full evening. And here I got perfect copies from one go, no restoration needed. But for this process you will 100% need to know how to work with plaster and how to make molds. And we're not going to deep dive into this, please rely on somebody else to teach you it. So step 1, create plaster molds. So divide the sculpt into 2 parts or more if the sculpt is on a more complicated side. I demonstrated how I do this in this IG post, but you can also Google it easily. Then create each half of the mold, and the whole construction needs to be a press-on mold. It's a little bit different from a slip casting mold. They have no pouring hole, and we use them to preserve as much of your sculpt as possible. Now step number 2, dust the mold halves with baby powder for easy release, or don't. This one is skippable. I unfortunately don't have a footage of it, but sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. Just don't overdo it. It needs to be a really fine dusting. Now fill the mold halves with polymer clay, press it on with fingers, and then pack the foil in. This is absolutely the same method as we did for polymer clay shells, but here you have multiple options for baking. And here where the lazy meter can fluctuate a bit. You can bake each half in plaster, putting your whole plaster half with polymer clay into your oven, then taking it out and rebaking it. because that part that touched the plaster didn't bake full way through, but it hardened enough that you can take it out and handle it without the fear of damaging the part. After that, you just take out the foil, connect the parts, and rebake them so that they are together. Next option is connecting those mold parts. The press-on mold is becoming one. You press really hard on it so that the seams are as minimal as possible, and you also bake it in plaster. Use your normal temperature. It will harden your clay a little bit, but it will not bake it 100%. So after some time, you take out the plaster mold. Make sure it's not hot to the touch. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself. Plaster is notorious for giving those burns. Then you open the press-on mold, you take the polymer clay part out and rebake it as is. Then you do everything with the seams and take out the foil as usual. Or there is another option where you skip hollowness. You take a chunk of polymer clay that is really soft, you put it into one side of a press-in mold. You close the mold with a second hub. It should be a little bit hard for you to mold it because you are squeezing the material basically inside and making it go into the empty spaces that are created with a mold. And you squeeze it real hard. Some people even put it under a table leg or some heavy books so that it stays pressed for a long period of time. Usually it takes 20 to 30 minutes, but some people leave it for a day or two. Plaster sucks out the plastification agent out of the polymer clay, and the polymer clay part becomes really dry and brittle. So when you open the mold, it is very important not to overdo it, so you will need to experiment with the timing. But if you open the mold, and the polymer clay part should usually stay in one part or the other, you can carefully take it out and bake it. And because it stayed in plaster, it became a little less malleable and a little more sturdy. This way, even without the support of the mold, your polymer clay part won't be deformed as a result of you taking it out. This last part is the most detail preserving way of them all, but it also takes a lot of polymer clay, so choose between all of these as you want. So this is how you copy your already sculpted body part. Hopefully this process is too much hustle for thieves, but useful and exciting for honest artists. If this helped you, like, subscribe, leave me comments, and check out my Patreon so that I could create more videos like this. Thank you guys for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons who support me day in and day out. See you next week. Bye!